Imagine spending your entire life building a house you would never live in until after you died. If you take a look at a map of Egypt, you'll notice something pretty interesting. There's this thin ribbon of life running right through the country, the Nile River. And on both sides of it, nothing but desert. But to the ancient Egyptians, that desert wasn't just dry, empty land. It was a place where another world felt incredibly close. And right there, along that invisible border between worlds, they built something that today we simply call a tomb. Yeah, I know, tomb isn't exactly the most comforting word in the world, but trust me. Once you hear how the ancient Egyptians actually thought about death and tombs, it becomes surprisingly peaceful. For them, death wasn't nearly as terrifying as most of us imagine it today. It wasn't really the end. It was more like setting off on a journey. Or maybe moving to a new home. Yeah? Amazing. To them, the word tomb didn't carry the same darkness that it carries for us today. What we call a grave was actually part of an incredibly sophisticated religious system. Its purpose wasn't to record someone's death. Its purpose was to make life continue. According to the consensus of modern Egyptologists and major museum collections, death in ancient Egypt wasn't considered the end of existence. It was simply a transition into another kind of life. Yeah, one that required preparation. That's exactly why they developed such elaborate burial rituals. And honestly, once you hear about them, I think you're really going to enjoy this story. Now imagine walking into one of these ancient Egyptian tombs today. Whether it's an actual tomb in Egypt, or a reconstructed one inside the British Museum, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The first thing you'd probably notice is a dark stone chamber. Quiet, still, maybe even a little mysterious. But to the Egyptians, this wasn't just a room. It served two purposes at exactly the same time. First, it protected the body. Second, it created a place where the living and the dead could remain connected. Right. Many tombs actually included spaces that were designed specifically for family members to visit, places where people could bring food, say prayers, and spend time with the person who had died. Yep, they literally brought food to someone who was dead. Sounds a little strange, right? But don't worry, I'll explain exactly why in just a minute. Still, maybe even a little mysterious. The British Museum actually points out that Egyptian tombs weren't simply burial places. They were part of everyday religious and social life. In other words, death wasn't seen as cutting someone off forever. It simply changed the way people stayed connected. And honestly, I think that's a really beautiful idea. A lot of us today are afraid of death because we think it means losing the people we love forever. The Egyptians didn't really see it that way. They believed the relationship didn't disappear. It simply changed form. And isn't that fascinating? Who knows? What if that's actually closer to the truth? Maybe death isn't nearly as dark as we've always imagined. Now here's another really important part of their beliefs. The body mattered. The physical body. You know how today we usually think, well, the body stays here. It eventually turns to dust. Whatever comes next, that's something else. The ancient Egyptians looked at it very differently. To them, the body remained an essential part of who you were. That's why mummification gradually became one of the most important and sophisticated traditions in Egyptian civilization. The whole point of mummification was to preserve the body so it would remain complete and recognizable in the next life. Because if the body disappeared, parts of the person's existence could no longer continue properly. In fact, many Egyptians believed that if the body was destroyed, the spirit could become confused after death, unable to recognize where it belonged, and that confusion might continue forever. Honestly, that's a fascinating way to think about it. So in ancient Egypt, death wasn't complete destruction. It was much more like relocating or moving somewhere new. One of the things that Egyptologists agree on today is that the ancient Egyptians didn't believe a human being was made of just one thing. A person was made up of several different parts. The three most important were the physical body, and the Ka, and the Ba. Right? Some texts mention even more parts, but these three are really the foundation. So, what exactly were they? Let's start with the Ka. Well, let's start with Ka. By the way, it's pronounced Ka. The Ka wasn't exactly your soul, and it wasn't exactly your mind either. The easiest way to think of it is as your life force, or maybe your spiritual counterpart. Yeah? It was the part of you that continued to exist after death, but it still needed support. According to ancient Egyptian religious texts, the Ka needed nourishment, and that's why people brought food to tombs. They put bread there, beer, wine, fruit, meat, pretty much anything that someone might enjoy during their lifetime. And here's the really interesting part. Even if there wasn't actual food, they believed that images of food could be effective. So they carved food on the walls. They painted giant feasts. They filled tombs with images of bread, ducks, cows, wine, vegetables, because they really believed that these images could have the same real-life benefit. Isn't that amazing? You know what this reminds me of? Those dream boards that people make today. You know, the ones where people print out pictures of their dream house, their dream car, their dream vacation, and then they stare at them every day because they believe that those pictures will eventually become reality. It's a little funny, isn't it? Humans really haven't changed that much. It's just the details that are different. Modern research also shows that for the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't thought of as a completely different world, more like life goes on, just in a different place. Now let's talk about the second important part, Ba. This is written as B and A. If you've ever seen ancient Egyptian artwork, you've probably noticed a strange little bird with a human head. This is the Ba, and it had a very special ability. It could leave the body. It could travel between worlds. And finally, it could return to the body. Wow! Numerous educational sources describe the Ba as the moving part of a person's personality, a part that wasn't tied to a place, which means, for the ancient Egyptians, death didn't mean the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a different journey. But let's get back to our original question. Why were tombs so important? Well, if we put everything we've talked about together, the body had to be preserved, the ka had to be nourished, the ba needed a place to return to. Once you understand these three ideas, the answer becomes surprisingly simple. A tomb wasn't just a place to bury someone. It was a complete support system designed to help life go on. Think about that for a moment. Today, we build tombs because emotionally, they often represent an end, a final goodbye, where it all stops. But the ancient Egyptians built tombs because they believed that the next chapter could begin there. So, which way of looking at it is closer to the truth? That's a very interesting question. Over thousands of years, Egyptian tombs became more and more complex. They started as very simple prehistoric tombs and eventually evolved into massive royal structures, especially for the pharaohs. By the way, the kings of ancient Egypt were called pharaohs. And don't worry, guys, we're going to spend many nights getting to know them. We'll meet powerful pharaohs. Wow, mysterious queens, strange gods, forgotten artists, and incredible stories hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to join me. Thank you, friends. Every night we'll explore art history together, slowly, calmly, and hopefully go to sleep a little wiser than we did yesterday. Yeah? Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, death. What Egyptologists point out over and over again is that the ancient Egyptians didn't see death as an enemy. They didn't see it as absolute annihilation. The fear that many of us carry with us today wasn't quite the same for them. That doesn't mean they took death lightly, not at all, but they believed it could be prepared for, something that could be managed, something that required careful planning, the right rituals, the right body, the right food, and there was constant communication. So, if we were to sum it all up in one simple thought, it would probably be this. For the ancient Egyptians, the tomb was never the end of the story. It was architecture, built to continue. A place where a person didn't just disappear, didn't just cease to exist, but stepped into a different way of life. There, in the silence of the desert, somewhere between the earth and the sky. And to be honest, maybe that's one of the reasons why people have been fascinated by ancient Egypt for thousands of years. Because beneath all the pyramids, the gold, the mummies, and the mysteries, there's a surprisingly comforting idea. Maybe, just maybe, death isn't the opposite of life. Maybe it's simply another chapter of it. And with that thought, right? I think this is probably a good place to let your mind drift and quietly wander into dreams. All right, now imagine the past. Now that we know what a tomb actually meant to the ancient Egyptians, let's slowly walk toward one. Not as tourists, not as archaeologists, but as quiet visitors, arriving in Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. The sun is beginning to set. The air is warm, but the heat of the day is finally starting to fade. Behind us, the Nile is still flowing peacefully. Wow. People are finishing their work in the fields. Boats drift across the river. Children are laughing somewhere in the distance. Life is still happening, but we're walking away from all of that. Step by step, right? The sounds begin to disappear. The green fields become smaller behind us. The desert becomes larger, quieter, almost endless. And after a while, you notice something. Most of the great Egyptian cemeteries weren't built on the eastern side of the Nile. They were built on the west. That wasn't an accident. To the ancient Egyptians, direction mattered a lot. Every single day, they watched the sun rise in the east. It brought warmth, light, life. People woke up, fields came alive, work began. But every evening, they watched that same sun slowly disappear into the western horizon. And they didn't see that as the sun dying. They believed the sun was beginning another journey, one that continued through the mysterious world beyond human sight, before being reborn again the next morning. The daily path of the sun became one of the greatest symbols of life, death, and rebirth in Egyptian religion. That's one of the reasons why so many royal cemeteries, including the famous Valley of the Kings, were built on the west bank of the Nile. The West became known as the Beautiful West, or simply the West. If you read ancient Egyptian tomb inscriptions, you'll notice something interesting. Many of them don't even say, "He died." Instead, they often say, "He has gone to the West." I don't know about you, but there's something strangely gentle about that. Not gone forever, just gone west. Almost like saying, "He left for another country," or "He's on another journey now." It's a surprisingly comforting way to think about death. And honestly, maybe that's one of the reasons Egyptian civilization spent more than 3,000 years building tombs with such incredible care. Not because they were obsessed with death, but because they were deeply invested in what they believed came after it. All right, are you ready? Let's step inside. Take it slow. Your eyes need a few seconds to adjust. The bright Egyptian sunlight is gone now. It's cooler in here, much quieter, and the sound of the outside world almost disappears. It's funny, isn't it? A place that's been completely silent for more than 3,000 years can somehow feel peaceful. Not creepy, just very, very quiet. As you walk a little farther in, you might expect to see empty stone walls. But that's not what the ancient Egyptians had in mind. These walls were never meant to stay blank. Actually, almost every surface had a job to do. The walls told stories. The ceilings became the sky. The pillars carried prayers. Even the colors mattered. This wasn't decoration. It was something much closer to building an eternal home. You know how today, when someone moves into a new house, they hang family photos, decorate the living room, choose furniture they love, maybe argue for 2 hours over where the couch should go? Apparently, humans have always been like that. The ancient Egyptians weren't decorating for guests. They were decorating for eternity. Take a closer look at one of the walls. At first glance, it almost looks like an ordinary family scene. Someone is baking bread. Another person is making beer. Farmers are harvesting grain. Cattle are walking peacefully across the fields. Birds fly above marshes. Children play. Musicians perform. Servants prepare food. It's almost an ordinary Tuesday. Which raises a good question. If this is a tomb, why does it look so alive? Yeah, guys? The answer is actually one of my favorite parts of Egyptian culture. They believed they could become real. Not physically, of course, but spiritually. If bread was painted on the wall, that bread could continue feeding the Ka. If servants were carved into stone, they could continue serving. If beautiful gardens were painted forever, those gardens could exist forever. It's an extraordinary idea. Art wasn't just something beautiful to look at. Art actually did something. It had a purpose. Honestly, that's probably one of the biggest differences between the way we often think about art today and the way the ancient Egyptians did. Today, we might walk through an art museum and say, "Oh, that's beautiful." The Egyptians might have looked at the same image and said, "No, it's useful." I kind of love that. Yeah? And here's something else that's really fascinating. Have you noticed something missing? There aren't many scenes of sadness, not many scenes of death, hardly any images of suffering. That's because the tomb wasn't meant to remember the worst day of someone's life. Wow. Amazing. It was meant to preserve their best life. The person buried here is usually shown healthy, young, strong, smiling, hunting, fishing, celebrating with family, receiving flowers, enjoying music, sharing meals, almost as if time itself had stopped. On the happiest version of who they've ever been. And to be honest, that's a really beautiful idea. If someone were to ask you today, which version of your life would you like to keep forever? That's actually a surprisingly difficult question. Personally, I probably spent about 6 months deciding. So, as we continue walking, the drawings become even more detailed. Now we see rows of little hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs were the ancient Egyptian writing script. To us, they seem mysterious, almost magical. Like a secret code. Today, by reading hieroglyphs and tombs, they've been able to uncover amazing secrets. It's as if the ancient Egyptians were connected to some kind of magical power. It was amazing. They knew the future, and they spoke like magical people. In the following nights, we will delve into these secrets and discoveries of the history of art. Remember to subscribe to me. Well, you know, I'm just starting to tell stories, so I appreciate you supporting me like a buddy. We'll be good friends. Well, okay. And let's be honest. They really do look incredibly cool. Maybe that's why they're printed on everything these days. Coffee mugs, t-shirts, phone cases, probably on someone's pajamas. But for the ancient Egyptians, hieroglyphs weren't mysterious decorations. Every symbol carried a meaning. Some registered names. Others were prayers. Some were offerings. Others were magical formulas intended to help the deceased pass safely into the next world. The words themselves had power. Writing something down could actually help make it happen. This is one of the reasons scribes held such an important place in Egyptian society. Writing wasn't just about recording information. Writing could shape reality. And then you notice something strange. One person reappears, and again, and again, sometimes much larger than the others. It's the owner of the tomb. Size is not meant to indicate their true appearance. It indicates importance, status, honor. The larger the statue, the more important that person was in the scene. So no, the owner of the tomb was not actually 10 feet tall, although it would have made it rather difficult to buy sandals. Egyptian artists were not trying to create realistic works. Good sleep, my friends. See you soon. Again.